See that $12 million resort behind me? The one with the marble fountains and valet parking? Yeah, that's built on my grandfather's farm. The farm my family owned for 70 years before some HOA witch decided she wanted it. I can still smell the fresh cow manure mixing with her expensive perfume the day she showed up demanding $450,000 in violation fees. Said my roosters were too loud. Said my barn was an eyesore. Said I had 30 days to pay up or she'd take everything. Patricia Whitmore thought she was dealing with some dumb country boy who'd roll over and play dead. She was wrong. Dead wrong. That woman is now serving 3 years in federal prison, and I'm about to tell you exactly how we took her down. But first, what would you do if someone tried to steal your family's land? Drop that in the comments. And where are you watching from? I want to see this story go worldwide. Let me take you back to where this whole mess started. My grandfather, Earl Morrison, bought this 127 acres back in 1952 with nothing but a handshake loan and a promise to pay it back in milk money. Built it into one of the finest dairy operations in East Tennessee. 3 barns, a creek running right through the middle, and enough pasture to keep 40 head of cattle fat and happy. This wasn't just land to Earl, it was his life's work. Every fence post he set by hand, every barn board he nailed himself. He used to tell me, "Jake, a man's not measured by what he owns, but by what he builds for the next generation." When Earl passed in 2019, he left me everything. The farm, the memories, and unfortunately, $89,000 in medical debt. I'm Jake Morrison, 34 years old, been swinging a hammer for a living since I was 18. Not exactly equipped to run a dairy operation, but I'll be damned if I was going to let some bank take away what my grandfather bled for. The first sign of trouble came in 2020 when they started building Willowbrook Estates right next door. Suddenly my farm wasn't surrounded by tobacco fields and old-growth oak trees anymore. Now I had McMansions worth $400,000 to $800,000 staring down at my weathered barn like it was some kind of historical embarrassment. The HOA formed before the first family even moved in. That should have been my first red flag, but I was too busy trying to figure out how to pay off Earl's medical bills to pay attention to a bunch of city folks playing neighborhood politics. Then I met Patricia Whitmore, and everything went to hell. Picture this. It's 7 in the morning, I'm out feeding the chickens, and this pristine white BMW X5 comes crunching up my gravel drive like it owns the place. Out steps this perfectly coiffed woman in a cream-colored pantsuit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She's got that fake Southern belle accent that sounds sweet as molasses, but cuts like a razor blade. "Good morning," she says, stepping carefully around a puddle in those designer heels. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. I believe we need to discuss your problem." Now, I've been dealing with roosters crowing at dawn my whole life. But apparently that's a violation when you've got neighbors who think country life should be as quiet as a meditation retreat. Patricia's standing there with a clipboard, tick-tock ticking off violations like she's reading a death sentence. "Excessive noise before 8 a.m., she says, pointing at my rooster like he's a criminal. "Unsightly agricultural structures visible from the road. Odors affecting neighboring property values." She pauses, wrinkling her nose at the smell of fresh manure mixing with her expensive perfume. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sure you understand that things have changed around here. We have standards to maintain." I'm gripping that fence post so tight I can feel the splinters digging into my palm. "Lady," I tell her, "my grandfather was milking cows here when all this was tobacco fields. You got a problem with roosters. Maybe you shouldn't have built your fancy houses next to a working farm." She gives me this smile that doesn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I think you'll find that's not quite how it works anymore. The Willowbrook Estates covenants clearly state that any activities affecting the community's quality of life can be subject to mitigation fees. $500 per month should cover the inconvenience to your neighbors. $500 per month for the crime of farming land my family had owned for 70 years. And if I refuse, I ask? That smile gets even colder. Well, then I suppose we'll have to explore other legal remedies. I'm an attorney, Mr. Morrison. I'm sure you'd prefer to handle this reasonably rather than expensively." As she's walking back to her BMW, my German Shepherd Rex starts barking his head off. The sound echoes off those fancy houses like he's announcing war. Patricia flinches, nearly stumbles on her heels, and shoots me a look that could freeze hell over. That's when I knew this wasn't about noise complaints or property values. This was about power. and Patricia Whitmore had just declared war on the wrong farmer's grandson. Patricia didn't waste any time showing me what other legal remedies looked like. 2 weeks after our little fence post chat, I got a certified letter that made my blood pressure spike higher than a July thermometer. Environmental Protection Agency complaint, filed by concerned citizens about potential groundwater contamination from my cattle operation. But here's the kicker. The complaint included technical language about nitrogen runoff coefficients and bacterial load thresholds that no ordinary neighbor would know. This was a professional hit job. The EPA inspector showed up on a Tuesday morning in a government sedan, looking about as comfortable on my farm as a penguin in Phoenix. Nice enough guy, reminded me of my high school science teacher, but he had a job to do. Water samples from my creek, soil samples from the pasture, even air quality measurements around the barn. Just following up on a complaint, he tells me, pulling on rubber gloves. Probably nothing to worry about, but someone filed a very detailed report. We have to check these things out. 3 weeks later, I got the results along with a bill for $3,200. Every single test came back cleaner than a preacher's conscience. Water quality excellent. Soil composition perfect. Air quality better than downtown Nashville on a good day. But that didn't matter. I still owed the EPA for their time in testing. While I'm trying to figure out how to pay for EPA tests on a construction worker's salary, the local newspaper runs a front-page story. Farm practices under investigation. Not farm cleared of environmental concerns or false complaint costs taxpayers money. Just under investigation, like I was running some kind of toxic waste dump instead of raising cattle. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I drove down to the county clerk's office. You know, that musty old building that smells like coffee and 40 years of bureaucratic paperwork. And started pulling public records. HOA formation documents, development permits, legal filings. All public information, all available for the price of photocopying. And that's where I found the smoking gun. Patricia's law firm, Whitmore & Associates, had handled every single piece of legal work for Willowbrook Estates development. The same Patricia Whitmore who was now HOA president was the same Patricia Whitmore who'd written the HOA covenants in the first place. She'd literally created the weapon she was using against me. Armed with this ammunition, I decided to attend my first HOA meeting. These things happen monthly in the community center, a building that used to be a one-room schoolhouse before they renovated it with marble floors and crystal chandeliers, because nothing says community spirit like spending $200,000 on a meeting room. I walked in wearing my cleanest work shirt and boots I'd actually scrubbed. 20-some neighbors sitting in folding chairs, most avoiding eye contact like I had some contagious farm disease. But I noticed something interesting. A few of the older residents, the ones who remembered when this was all farmland, gave me little nods of support. Patricia's holding court at the front, reviewing monthly financials like she's running IBM instead of a neighborhood HOA. When she sees me, that fake smile appears faster than a summer thunderstorm. "Mr. Morrison," she says, all honey and venom, "how nice of you to join us. I trust you've had time to consider our previous conversation about community standards." I stood up, holding my stack of documents. "Actually, I've been doing some research. Turns out your law firm created this HOA and wrote all its rules. That's fascinating, considering you're now using those same rules to extort money from me." The room went dead silent. You could hear the air conditioning humming. Patricia's smile disappeared like smoke in a hurricane. "I'm not sure what you're implying," she says, but her voice had lost that syrupy sweetness. "My professional qualifications are exactly why this community trusts me to maintain our standards. Standards that include filing false EPA complaints with technical language that could only come from someone with legal training," I replied. "Funny how that works." Now Patricia's face was turning red under that expensive makeup. Several neighbors started whispering among themselves. Not all of them looked happy with their HOA queen anymore. "Furthermore," I continued, "I find it interesting that you've already been in contact with county officials about my property. Makes a guy wonder what other plans you might have." That last part was pure bluff, but the way Patricia's eyes widened told me I'd hit pay dirt. She knew something about county planning that I didn't. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced, slamming her gavel like a judge dismissing court. "If you have personal grievances, Mr. Morrison, address them through proper legal channels." As people filed out, elderly Mary Beth Chen, one of the few neighbors who'd lived here before the development, stopped by my chair. "Your grandfather was a good man," she whispered. "Don't let that woman destroy what he built." That's when I realized this wasn't just about HOA fees anymore. Patricia had bigger plans for my land, and I was about to find out exactly how deep this conspiracy went. Mary Beth's words stuck with me like burrs on a work shirt. Over the next week, I started paying closer attention to what was happening around my property. And what I found made my grandfather's old stories about crooked politicians seem like bedtime fairy tales. Patricia wasn't just filing complaints. She was running a full-scale harassment campaign, 3 surprise county health department inspections in 2 weeks, all mysteriously scheduled for days when I was at my construction job. Each one cost me half a day's pay to rush home and deal with inspectors looking for violations that didn't exist. The health department guy, poor bastard just doing his job, seemed as confused as I was. Someone filed a complaint about unsanitary livestock conditions, he told me, standing in my spotless barn that Earl had maintained like a hospital operating room. But honestly, Mr. Morrison, this is one of the cleanest operations I've seen. Clean or not, every inspection generated paperwork, and paperwork generated fees. $50 here, $75 there, death by 1,000 cuts. Just expensive enough to hurt, but not big enough to justify hiring a lawyer. But Patricia's biggest mistake was getting greedy. She started recruiting other HOA board members to file individual complaints. Noise violations from Karen Henderson in the pink house. Noxious odors from Bob Mitchell, who drove the green Tesla. Property line disputes from 3 different neighbors, all filed within 24 hours of each other. That's when I decided to go treasure hunting in my grandfather's attic. Earl was a pack rat who never threw away a document in his life. Birth certificates from 1932, tax returns from the Eisenhower administration, every receipt for every nail he'd ever bought. But buried under decades of memories, I found something that made my heart pound like a bass drum at a rock concert. The original property survey from 1952, hand-drawn and signed by the county surveyor. And according to those faded pencil lines, my property extended 40 feet beyond where I'd always thought the fence line was. 40 feet that now included the HOA's precious community playground with its $15,000 swing set and rubber mulch that cost more per square foot than my living room carpet. I spread that yellowed paper across my kitchen table like I was planning a military invasion, cross-referenced it with the modern surveys from the development. Double-checked the property markers that were still embedded in old oak trees. No doubt about it. The Willowbrook Estates HOA had built their community playground on my land. Armed with this bombshell, I did what any red-blooded American would do in the digital age. I posted the survey comparison on the Willowbrook Estates Facebook group with a simple caption: "Interesting discovery about property lines. Might want to double-check those HOA boundaries." The response was faster than a fox in a henhouse. Within 2 hours, I had 17 comments, 43 likes, and 3 private messages from neighbors suddenly very concerned about their own property lines. The best part? Patricia Whitmore's response in all caps: "This is harassment and intimidation. I'm consulting my attorney." Nothing says guilty conscience like threatening to lawyer up over a Facebook post. But Patricia wasn't done playing dirty. 2 days after my social media revelation, I came home from work to find a sheriff's deputy waiting in my driveway, looking uncomfortable as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. "Mr. Morrison," he says, touching the brim of his hat like we're in some old Western movie. "I've got a complaint here that you've been threatening your neighbors. Ms. Whitmore filed for a restraining order." I could taste the irony in my mouth like pennies. "Threatening how, exactly?" He pulls out a folder thick as a phone book. "Says here you've been conducting a harassment campaign, posted threatening messages on social media, made intimidating statements about your legal options regarding their property." Legal options. That was Patricia's spin on me mentioning I'd found an old survey. In her world, discovering you own land that someone else built on was intimidation. The hearing was scheduled for the following Friday. Patricia showed up in a navy blue power suit that screamed serious attorney, flanked by 2 associates who looked like they'd stepped out of a legal drama TV show. I showed up in my cleanest work clothes with a folder full of documents and a growing understanding that I was about to get schooled in how the system really works. The judge, a tired-looking man who'd probably seen 1,000 petty neighbor disputes, listened to Patricia's presentation about my pattern of harassment and veiled threats against the community. She painted me as an unhinged farmer terrorizing innocent suburban families with my dangerous farm equipment and aggressive social media posts. When it was my turn to speak, I started to explain about the property survey and the harassment campaign against me. But the judge cut me off with a wave of his hand. Mr. Morrison, I'm issuing a temporary restraining order. You're not to contact any HOA board members or post about them on social media. Violation will result in immediate arrest. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt like David facing Goliath with a rubber slingshot. Patricia had outgunned me completely, and she knew it. As I passed her in the hallway, she leaned close enough that I could smell that expensive perfume again. "You should have taken the easy way," she whispered. "Now it's going to cost you everything." That's when I realized this wasn't just about property lines or HOA fees. Patricia Whitmore was playing a much bigger game, and I was about to find out exactly what she was really after. Patricia's restraining order was like handing a loaded gun to someone who'd already been shooting at you. Within a week, she'd weaponized that court document into a full-scale legal assault that would have made Sherman's march through Georgia look like a Sunday stroll. First came the motion to force sale of my property for public nuisance. Not just fines anymore. She wanted me gone completely. The legal filing was thicker than a Sunday newspaper and written in the kind of lawyer speak that makes your eyes cross. But the gist was simple. My farm was allegedly such a threat to public health and safety that the only solution was forced sale at auction. Then she brought in reinforcements. Whitmore and Associates suddenly had co-counsel from Nashville, Barnes, Mitchell and Cross, the kind of white shoe law firm that charges more per hour than I made in a week. These weren't small-town lawyers playing neighborhood politics. These were legal predators who specialized in land acquisition. I scraped together what I could and hired Jimmy Fitzgerald, a local attorney who'd handled Earl's estate. Jimmy was a good man, honest, hardworking, the kind of lawyer who still believed in justice instead of billable hours. But watching him go up against Patricia's legal army was like watching a Little League pitcher face the New York Yankees. "Jake," he told me over coffee at the diner, spreading the legal documents across the table like battle plans. "I'll be straight with you. They're asking for an emergency hearing to seize your property within 30 days. The judge who signed the restraining order seems sympathetic to their community standards argument. 30 days, 70 years of family history, and they wanted to erase it in 30 days. That's when desperation drove me back to Earl's attic, searching through boxes I'd never bothered to open. Old Christmas decorations, faded photographs, receipt books from the 1960s. And buried at the bottom of a cardboard box marked "Important Papers," I found correspondence that stopped my heart cold. Letters from 1995, addressed to Earl Morrison from Tennessee Natural Gas Exploration Company. The letterhead was fancy, the language formal, but the message was crystal clear. They wanted to lease our mineral rights for natural gas drilling. I spread those 27-year-old letters across the kitchen table, hands shaking like leaves in a windstorm. According to the correspondence, Earl's property sat on top of what the geologists called significant shale gas reserves. The initial offer was for $50,000 just for the lease rights, plus royalties on anything they extracted. Earl had turned them down flat. His handwritten response, carbon copied in his neat farmer's cursive, was classic Earl Morrison. "Thank you for your interest, but this land is for growing things, not digging them up. The offer is declined." But here's the kicker. Those letters mentioned that recent advances in drilling technology had made previously uneconomical deposits suddenly very profitable. And that was in 1995. What would those same deposits be worth 30 years later? I spent the next 3 days researching everything I could about natural gas prices, fracking technology, and Tennessee drilling regulations. What I found made my grandfather's old refusal look like the smartest business decision in family history. Current natural gas prices were 3 times what they'd been in 1995, and new horizontal drilling techniques meant they could extract gas from formations that were impossible to reach back then. My 127 acres potentially sat on millions of dollars in natural gas. Armed with this revelation, I started making phone calls to modern drilling companies. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Tennessee Energy Partners offered to send a geologist within 48 hours. Appalachian Gas and Oil wanted to schedule a meeting ASAP. Every company I called was suddenly very interested in the Morrison family farm. But somehow Patricia found out about my drilling company meetings. I know because she showed up at my door the next morning earlier than usual, looking like she hadn't slept. Gone was the perfect hair and immaculate makeup. This was Patricia Whitmore with her mask slipping, and what I saw underneath wasn't pretty. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into my kitchen without invitation, "about your recent business inquiries." I poured myself coffee, didn't offer her any. "I'm not supposed to be talking to you, remember? Something about a restraining order?" "Cut the crap, Morrison." Her voice had lost all pretense of southern sweetness. "I know you've been talking to gas companies. That's a mistake, a big mistake." "Funny thing about mistakes," I replied, leaning against my counter. "Seems like everyone's been making them lately, like building playgrounds on other people's property, or filing false EPA complaints, or maybe not mentioning that the land you're trying to steal sits on a natural gas gold mine." Patricia's face went white as fresh snow. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just about some HOA dispute anymore. There are people involved who don't take kindly to complications." "What people?" She stood up, straightening her jacket like armor. "Smart people. People with resources. People who've invested significant money in this area's development potential. You can take our generous offer and walk away with enough money to buy a nice little house somewhere else. Or you can fight us and lose everything." After she left, I sat in my kitchen staring at those old letters from Earl's box. My grandfather had known something was special about this land. He'd turned down money that could have changed his life because he understood that some things are worth more than cash. Now I was starting to understand why Patricia Whitmore wanted my farm so badly, and why she was willing to destroy my life to get it. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. Patricia's threat about people with resources wasn't the kind of thing you ignore when you're dealing with millions of dollars in underground treasure. So I called my old Army buddy, Marcus Thompson, who'd been running a private investigation business in Nashville since we got out of the service. Marcus showed up 2 days later in a beat-up Ford pickup that looked about as threatening as a golden retriever, which was exactly the point. "In our line of work," he used to say, "the best surveillance vehicle is the one nobody notices." "Jake," he said, shaking my hand with that firm grip that brought back memories of desert patrols and midnight guard duty, "you always did know how to pick the interesting fights." Within 48 hours, Marcus had uncovered more dirt on Patricia Whitmore than a backhoe in a construction site. Turns out our HOA queen wasn't just a small-town attorney with big ambitions. She was up to her perfectly coiffed eyeballs in debt, desperation, and what Marcus called creative financial arrangements. "Your Ms. Whitmore has a gambling problem," Marcus told me, spreading photographs and financial documents across my kitchen table. "Atlantic City, Vegas, those riverboat casinos down in Mississippi. She's been hemorrhaging money for years." The numbers were staggering. Credit card debt north of $200,000, a second mortgage on her Nashville house, personal loans from sources that Marcus described as not the kind of people you want to owe money to. But the real smoking gun was buried in corporate filing documents that Marcus had pulled from the Secretary of State's office. Whitmore and Associates wasn't just the law firm that had handled Willowbrook Estates development. Patricia personally owned a 15% stake in the development company itself. "She's not just your HOA president," Marcus explained, pointing to a web of shell companies and financial connections that looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream. "She's been planning this land grab for years. The HOA harassment, the legal pressure, all of it. It's designed to force you into selling at below-market prices." Then Marcus dropped the real bombshell. He'd found a geological survey from 2018 commissioned by something called Tennessee Resource Development LLC, another shell company connected to Patricia's web of corporate entities. The survey covered a 12-square-mile area that included my farm and all of Willowbrook Estates. The estimated recoverable natural gas reserves were worth between $8 and $12 million. "Your grandfather's farm isn't just sitting on gas," Marcus said, pointing to the geological charts. "It's the access point for the entire deposit. Without your land, they can't get to any of it. That's why she's so desperate to get you out." I stared at those survey maps, feeling like I'd been punched in the stomach and won the lottery at the same time. $12 million in natural gas, and Patricia Whitmore had been trying to steal it with $500 monthly HOA fees. "There's more," Marcus continued. "The Willowbrook Estates development, it's not really a housing development, it's a cover story. Those fancy houses are just window dressing for what's really going to be a natural gas extraction facility. The resort they're building, that's going to be the processing plant." Everything suddenly made horrible, perfect sense. The upscale houses to make the development look legitimate. The HOA to control the surrounding property. The systematic harassment to force out anyone who might ask inconvenient questions. Patricia hadn't just been stealing my land, she'd been running a con game that would have made P.T. Barnum proud. "What's our move?" I asked. Marcus grinned like a wolf who'd just spotted a particularly fat sheep. We're going to give Ms. Whitmore exactly what she's been asking for, a fight. But this time, we're going to fight on our terms. That night, I sat on Earl's old porch swing, listening to the creek babble and the cattle settling down for the evening. My grandfather had always said that the land would take care of the family if the family took care of the land. He just never mentioned that sometimes taking care of the land meant going to war with people who wanted to steal it. But war was exactly what Patricia Whitmore was about to get.